This chilling footage captures the exact moment police uncovered a nightmare. A mother and her 6 children brutally murdered in their home. For years, Yulia had been living in fear, desperately trying to escape the monster she married. She reported the abuse, the threats, she begged for protection, but time and time again, the system turned a blind eye. Then, on the morning of June 26, 2015, her worst fears became reality. A simple argument over a haircut spiraled into something out of a horror movie. Neighbors heard the screams, the violence, but no one did a thing. A week later, authorities discovered the grisly aftermath: 19 plastic bags filled with their body parts. And the most chilling part, Oleg Belov's killing spree wasn't over yet. This case is as gut-wrenching as it is horrifying. A brutal reminder of how quickly violence can escalate and how the system meant to protect victims can leave them completely helpless. But to truly grasp the horror of what happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Oleg Belov lived in the city of Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, with his family. On the surface, his life should have been one of success. He came from a loving family, had supportive parents who believed he was destined for greatness, and was ridiculously smart, especially when it came to physics and math. His parents were convinced he'd become a famous scientist, and when he got accepted into a top university in Moscow, it seemed like he was well on his way. But then, things took a weird turn. While in college, Oleg started having these intense visions, UFOs, other worldly messages, the whole sci-fi package. And instead of brushing it off as a wild dream, he became completely obsessed. He dropped out of school, announcing that he had a new mission in life, building a spaceship and leaving Earth behind. He even claimed he was on a 300-year program, as if he had some grand cosmic purpose. Somewhere along the line, he got married and joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, maybe looking for stability or just a new audience for his eccentric ideas. But that didn't last long. Turns out Oleg couldn't keep it together. He cheated on his wife and got kicked out of church. One of the senior members, Alexander Zimin, later said, "At first everything was fine. He studied the Bible, participated in church life, but then he found some girlfriend in Nizhny Novgorod, left his wife, and lived in sin." Yeah, they weren't having it. Oleg was officially cast out for breaking the 7th commandment. That's when Yulia entered the picture, a 24-year-old from a small town called Kov. It's unclear if she was the reason Oleg left his wife or if she came later, but for whatever reason, she fell for him. And keep in mind, Oleg was 20 years older. They wasted no time in starting a family, quickly having 6 kids together. But from the start, their relationship was toxic. Oleg was controlling, violent, and abusive in every way. In 2010, when Yulia finally got the courage to bring up divorce, he snapped. He attacked her with the blunt side of an axe. And here's the wild part. He later claimed he wasn't trying to kill her, just intimidate her. And sadly, it worked. Terrified and Yulia stayed. She spent days recovering in the hospital, but Oleg, he walked away scot-free. No jail time, no real consequences, just a schizophrenia diagnosis that let him off the hook. But Yulia's mother, Valentina, always saw him for what he was. She later said, "A moral freak. From the moment I met him, I was ashamed to even walk down the street with him." And she wasn't wrong. According to Valentina, Yulia tried to leave Oleg after the attack, but he cried, begged, and swore he'd change. And she believed him, but of course he never did. Over the years, Yulia went to the police over and over again, reporting the abuse, hoping for help, but nothing changed. In 2011, she even went to court, desperately trying to get full custody of her kids, telling the judge that Oleg was hurting them. But Oleg objected, and just like that, her request was denied. The family was labeled dysfunctional and at risk. Oleg wasn't working. He lived off of disability checks for schizophrenia, while Yulia relied on financial aid for being pregnant. It was a miserable, trapped existence. Authorities were watching them, at least on paper. They knew the kids were in danger if things didn't change, yet nothing was done. Neighbors would hear the screams, the violent crashes coming from inside the home, but after a while, it just became background noise. No one stepped in, no one saved them. Then, in June 2015, Yulia finally hit her breaking point. She went to the police, telling them that Oleg had threatened to kill her and throw her away like garbage. This time, she was determined. She filed for divorce and sought custody of the kids. She was not going to let him keep his hold killed on them. But Oleg, he wasn't about to go down without a fight. When he found out about her plans, he completely snapped, threatening to cut off one of the children's heads. Yet Yulia pushed forward. The court date was set for June 27th, 2015, but tragically she never made it. On June 26th, the day before she was supposed to finally break free, Yulia and her 6 children were brutally, mercilessly silenced. June 26th, 2015 started like any other day in the Belov household, except this time a simple argument would spiral into something unimaginable. It all began over a haircut. Oleg was furious about how Yulia had cut their 6-year-old son's hair, calling it foolish. And just like that, the tension exploded into a full-blown fight. Later in court, Oleg recounted the moment in chilling detail. "She cut him like a parrot. I asked her, 'Are you kidding or what?' I tried to grab the hair clipper and a fight broke out. I hit her twice in the jaw. She ran into the hallway, knocking on the neighbors' doors, screaming. I had never heard her scream like that before. I was terrified. I was scared they would take the kids away. So I grabbed her hand and quietly brought her back inside." And just like always, the neighbors did nothing. To them, this was just another fight in the Belov household. Loud, violent, but normal. No one stepped in and no one called for help. But this time, things took a terrifying turn. Oleg later described the moment everything changed. "Yulia told me not to touch her. She said she would call the police. I felt anger and I realized I would either kill her or I would lose the children. I took my hunting knife and stabbed her right in the side." And he didn't stop. Yulia's screams must have echoed through the apartment as he kept attacking her right in front of their children. His eldest daughter, Elena, who is 7 years old, tried to shield her mother, but Oleg grabbed her by the hair and turned his knife on her too. One by one, he went after each of his children, hunting them down, even the ones who tried to hide in the bathroom. When asked why he did it, his response was beyond disturbing. "I killed the children so they would stay mine. The Bible says children will be resurrected. So I decided that the kids would resurrect and we would live together again." Just like that, in a span of 10 minutes, he wiped out his entire family. But Oleg wasn't finished. With his wife and children gone, his mind turned to his mother. He convinced himself that once people found out what he had done, the neighbors would retaliate, that she'd either be stoned to death or die of shock. In his warped reality, the only way to save her was to kill her first. So he traveled to the village where his 73-year-old mother, Zinaida, lived. He lured her out to their shared garden, pretending they were just going to pick raspberries. And then, caught in the depths of his twisted delusions, he prayed for strength to go through with it. Convinced he had received some divine signal, he knifed her 21 times. As he did it, he kept repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Then, as if nothing happened, he buried her body right there in the soil that they had tended together. After the murders, Oleg went into full cover-up mode. He grabbed an axe from his mother's house and then went shopping for plastic bags, foam sealant, surgical gloves, and an absurd amount of perfume and cologne. He had a plan, and it was gruesome. Wearing the surgical gloves, he used the axe to cut up his family's bodies, stuffing their remains into the plastic bags piece by piece. To keep the smell of decomposition from seeping out, he sealed the doors and windows with foam and doused the entire apartment in perfume and cologne. And then he put on an act. To keep suspicions at bay, he went door to door, casually telling neighbors that Yulia and the kids had gone to a nearby village for a little break. And as a gesture of goodwill, and probably to throw them off, he even handed out a basket of raspberries he had picked with his mother, as if that would erase the horrific reality of what he had done. But he didn't stop there. He kept the lie going. He called Yulia's mother, Valentina, with the same story. He even went to the kids' school, telling staff that they were away for a while. To make everything seem normal, he continued picking up their milk using prepaid vouchers. Just another desperate attempt to avoid raising any red flags. But despite his efforts, the neighbors knew something was off. One of them later told reporters that Oleg has always been unsettling. A quiet, cagey man who everyone, including his own children, seemed terrified of. And as much as he tried to keep things under wraps, people had seen him sneaking out of the apartment in the dead of the night, lugging large, suspicious bags. Then, after a week of silence from Yulia, her mother knew something was wrong. She called the police and asked for a welfare check to be done. And that's when the horrifying truth started to unravel. On August 4th, authorities arrived at the apartment, and right away they knew something was off. The eerie silence was unsettling, especially for a home with young kids. After knocking with no response, they forced their way in through a window, but nothing could have prepared them for what was inside. 19 plastic bags, each one holding the dismembered remains of an entire family. Local news stations captured the gut-wrenching scene as police carried the black bags out, while stunned neighbors watched in horror. No one could believe it. A crime this gruesome had happened right next door and they had no idea. Their minds flashed back to the screams they heard that morning, the ones they ignored, assuming it was just another argument. Now, they couldn't shake the thought, if we had stepped in, would Yulia and the kids still be alive? And the most chilling detail, authorities confirmed that Yulia was pregnant. This wasn't just 7 lives lost, it was 8. Oleg instantly became the prime suspect, sparking a nationwide manhunt. When police searched his mother's house, they found yet another horror. Her body, also dismembered, buried in a freshly dug grave. Authorities feared Oleg wasn't done killing, and they were right. Hours later, they found him hiding in a shed on his mother-in-law's property. He had a knife in his hand, leading investigators to believe he was waiting for Valentina, planning to mark his 10th victim. Thankfully, she wasn't home, and before he could strike again, police moved in. Oleg wasn't going down without a fight. When officers moved in to arrest him, he lunged at them with a knife, forcing them to open fire. He was hit in the stomach and rushed to the hospital, but somehow the bullet barely did any damage. He made a full recovery, and just like that, his whole demeanor changed. Suddenly, he was begging for forgiveness, playing the remorseful act. But the police weren't fooled. His days of manipulation were over. Oleg was officially charged with multiple counts of murder. But as the investigation continued, authorities started looking at him for another crime, a brutal attack on a 19-year-old girl whose body was found in an abandoned building back in 2014. She had been viciously assaulted and strangled to death in the same area where Oleg later slaughtered his family. Surveillance footage from that time captured a suspicious man following the girl, and when a sketch was made, it bore a striking resemblance to Oleg, but there just wasn't enough evidence to pin it on him. At first, he denied everything, even the murders of his own family, but under interrogation, he broke down in tears, finally confessing to the unthinkable. He admitted that his plan was to bury their remains near abandoned houses owned by Yulia's mother, thinking no one would ever find them. Psychiatrists evaluated him and confirmed that while he did suffer from schizophrenia, he was still sane enough to stand trial. He was fully responsible for his actions. And then came his disgusting courtroom performance. Oleg turned to Yulia's mother and delivered a fake self-pitying apology, somehow making himself out to be the victim. He said, "I want to apologize to my mother-in-law. Thank you for raising such a good daughter. We were happy together. We gave birth to 6 beautiful children. I was the happiest man on earth, so I can say that no one lost more than I did. Nobody will understand my agony and suffering better than you. Yulia's fondest wish was that I would call you mom. Mother, forgive me. Please, you are the greatest treasure. I'm sorry I'm saying this just now. I think Yulia would be happy." How twisted is that? And Valentina wasn't buying it. She fired back saying, "He is a good actor. These are crocodile tears he sheds now." The same was back in 2010 when he tried to kill her for the first time. He cried and she forgave him. In 2016, Oleg was officially found guilty of the brutal murders and sentenced to life in a high-security prison. But even then, he refused to take responsibility. Suddenly, he was claiming he was innocent, saying he was forced into confessing. He even tried to shift suspicion onto others, arguing that since Yulia had made complaints about multiple people, anyone could have taken her life. But the court wasn't buying it. Due to his medical condition, he was ordered to undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment while serving his sentence. On top of that, the court ruled that he had to pay 5 million Russian rubles, which is about 52,000 in moral damages to Yulia's mother, Valentina, who had now lost everything because of him. And here's where it gets even more frustrating. This entire tragedy could have been avoided if police had just taken Yulia's cries for help seriously. Because of this, 6 officers were investigated for negligence, leading to multiple resignations and an overhaul in how authorities handle domestic violence cases moving forward. But what do you think about this case? Do you believe the police failed Yulia and her children, allowing this tragedy to happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if this story shook you, there's plenty more where that came from. Check out the other videos for more shocking cases. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.